You mentioned that you were in the WRNS, the Women's
Royal Naval Service, yeah.
So if I may ask, what made you decide to enlist in the
Well, okay, why wasn't I in the army? Because my dad was in the army. My parents were living in barracks, in married quarters. And where my father was working, there was a young, they called them ATS, Auxiliary Territorial Service. That was the women in the army. And she became a friend of the family. And sometimes I'd go down to where her quarters were. They had a whole group of them settled in what had been married quarters. And it was so untidy and filthy, and it was not properly cared for, and I thought, I don't want to do that. The other thing was, both the Army and the Air Force had these big patch pockets here, and in those days I don't think big bosoms were quite as much admired as they are now, but to me they were ugly. The WREN uniform was actually, their uniform was, I can't think what you call it now, it was much smoother fabric. It's more like officers' fabric. The WREN uniform was much rougher serge, but it was nicely tailored. And I don't know, I think everyone has a bit of an admiration for the Navy. And I say, when I'd seen the circumstances under which they were living, and the Navy is known for being shipshape, what happened, the other thing too, there was conscription for women. Okay, now women could be conscripted into the Army, the Air Force, what they called the Land Army. That's the women that helped on the farms because the
men were gone.
Men were gone, that's right. The women could be conscripted into factories. There was quite a number of things, but the Navy was so popular that almost all the women in the WRENs were volunteers. And this meant that they were almost hand-picked, because you volunteer and the Navy looks at your record and they say, oh, I don't think she's suitable. No. So you feel that you're amongst more desirable people for friends and that sort of thing. And I think that had a big influence as well. And I tell you now, even now, there's a big bond amongst naval people, both men and women. Anywhere I go, if I find someone who's in the Navy and we start talking, it doesn't matter. We're Navy. And it's a real family feeling, and I'm not sure that it's quite the same in the Army and the Air Force. I think for the Army, for instance, they stick more to by regiment, whereas perhaps because the Navy, the men at least, were moved from ship to ship.
So what was your role in the Navy?
In the Navy? Oh, well, it's very secret.
Are you not
no, I can tell you now. That was the thing too. The Americans have a different feeling about that. They used to ask us and we'd say, sorry, I can't tell you. Oh, but you can tell us. But no, couldn't even tell our parents. What I was doing, I was at Marconi Research Laboratories. You heard of Marconi? Oh, it's an Italian name. He was very, very big in early radio, and he had set up this laboratory in East Anglia. I've got a map I can show you later if you've got the time to.
Sure.
And we were Do you know anything about shortwave radio? Little bit? Mm-hmm. Well, you know that one uses shortwave. You see, there's no satellites in these days.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm talking about where our technology again was limited. Shortwave radio was the only one that you could get round the world with, because with the long waves, the signal would go up and it'd go through the ionosphere off into space somewhere. Whereas with the short waves, when it reached the ionosphere, as long as it was the level around the Earth was ionized strongly enough, it would reflect back. So if you can imagine it would be going up and down, and it gets diverted until it went anywhere in the world, depending on the frequency. Now, because the ionosphere was, it was the sun that brought the strength to the ionosphere. So it was much different during the day than the night, but it was different from season to season because of the tilt of the Earth. And the other thing was, when there was a flare-up on the sun, that sometimes would ionize the ionosphere to such an extent that the signal did not go around the world, it just got absorbed. So it had what they called radio blackouts. And what we were doing is we were plotting the density of this ionization, and we'd got templates that we could use to make calculations for us, and we could explain the conditions hour by hour and keep people informed. There was another group that I was not involved with, but they would use our material, and for transatlantic flights, this would need a really good lesson to explain this in detail. But what happens with have what they call skip distances. So you've got a signal that goes up and comes back again, up and comes back again. Now, of course, the signals are going, it's a big arc, it's not just one thing. But it will only reach certain areas. So you need, when you're crossing the Atlantic, you have to change frequency part way across. I don't know how many times, because I wasn't doing this. But the idea was this group would take that information and make recommendations about frequencies that should be used at a certain time of day, at a certain position. And so it's very, very important to keep communication going. There were other things that we learned that I never used, which were very interesting. When you have someone that's sending Morse messages, you can tell who sent the message, because it's something like handwriting. The way the dots and dashes go, no two persons do it quite the same. And then you could tell which machine it was, which means you could tell which ship, because until it got serviced, because there's electronically, when you make the connection for the dot or the dash, there's a kind of spike that goes up. You know what I mean when I say spike. It's getting a little difficult here. I could call it maybe the profile, but again, each piece of equipment displays differently, and you could, until it gets serviced, you would say, well, this is the one I saw yesterday, and it's now over here. And so you've got two things you recognise is the person and the machine. Now you can't put a name to it, but you know it's the same one as that was.